Be sure to like and subscribe to Starbound here on YouTube. It ain't much, but it's honest work. The bright yellow star burned calmly, its nuclear fury vented into the freezing void of space to give life to the planets that danced around its life-giving light. The system it reigned over was full of many worlds of all shapes and sizes. Small terrestrial worlds orbited close to this stellar shepherd, while the larger, bloated forms of huge gaseous giants lurked around the fringes of the system. And beyond them, a huge expanse of free-floating rocks and dust 1,000,000,000,000 miles across that surrounded the system like a curtain of stellar refuse. The third world, a bright blue jewel, turned lazily in that dark abyss as it circled endlessly around the vitalizing light of its home star. It was far out into this cosmic curtain that space itself seemed to warp. A twisting point of pure darkness appeared and seemed to grow steadily in size and scope till an enormous sphere of blackness hung there, suspended amongst this vast empty expanse like a wound in reality itself. It seemed to pulse once, and then shrunk, and in doing so revealed the form of something massive. Well over 10,000 meters in length and looking like some great blasted hulk, its dusty gray surface was covered in pockmarks and the scars of innumerable past collisions. The whole of the thing looking more like the cratered surface of a comet than anything built by intelligent hands. But built by intelligence it had been, and deep within the core of the mighty vessel was a large room filled with coolly glowing screens and slow-moving creatures of every conceivable shape, size, and character. It was one of these strange alien forms that spoke first. Their sideways orientated mouth filled with dark diamond-hard teeth that gnashed as they announced loudly, the clinking of their voice echoing through the whole of the ship over the intercom system.
Graviton displacement polarizer translation successful.
The large insect-like wing eyes that sprouted from the being's narrow shoulders twisted to look at another speaker as their low bass voice grumbled over the sounds of the ship's outer hull creaking.
Why do you always say that, Year? I am sure the vast majority of the crew can feel the twisting of space-time for themselves as we slip through the gateway.
The speaker was large, much taller than the other aliens on the bridge by far. Their nearly 3-meter height was almost completely covered in extremely long, shaggy white fur that nearly obscured their form in its entirety. Only the barest hint as to their true form peeked through, gaunt shoulders and bony limbs nearly hidden by the cascade of fur. Yeer shook their wing eyes subtly as they responded a bit petulantly, the white exoskeleton alien lifting one of their 4 armored legs and making a subtle kicking gesture towards the tall one.
You strike me to the quick, Alatok. You waltz about with your fingers touching things and pulling levers, all the while asking necessitation of the one thing I'm able to do aboard this grand vessel that gives me any amount of satisfaction.
As if to further mock him, the furred alien raised an arm from deep within the furry prison of their body.
Yes, see, you all think yourselves superior because...
But their clattering tirade was cut short as another voice spoke from behind them. The sound of it was muffled, a buzzing bark that came from much lower to the decking of the ship. So low that Alitok was forced to hunch so that their nearly fur-obstructed eyes could see this newcomer upon the raised platform that dominated the central hub of the Titanic ship. Yes, but at least you both can see over the tables in the galley on this jam-packed barge of a ship. The newcomer was short, their wide, flattened body looking to have been smashed to the ground by the extreme, punishing gravity of their homeworld. They had 5 starfish-like arms that radiated outward from a central mass which sprouted 3 short eye stalks. 2 of them looked at either alien independently of each other as the third observed the surrounding readouts curiously. The newcomer was Nick Cyan, and their fubsy body undulated as they slowly dragged themselves across the freezing composite decking of the vast exploratory vessel towards the other two. Yer hunched inward slightly, the grinding of their quartz carapace filling the air for a few moments as they shifted from side to side on their long insectoid legs. Finally, they stomped a foot onto the frozen deck with a loud clang.
Yes, we can. And I am sure we could discuss the innate differences of our peoples for all eternity. But seeing as how we have arrived in that system you scouted, Cascus, don't you think we should get to scouting for whatever was broadcasting that garbled signal?
The short Nick Cyan bobbed their bulbous dark yellow eyes, and slowly pulled themselves up a short ramp to an elevated section of the floor that allowed them access to the dimly glowing screens with their 5 flexible arms. I can see that we are in a younger system, bright mid-class yellow dwarf. It was not my first choice, but it is where the signal seemed to have originated from, Captain. The wide alien waved several of their manipulator tendrils around. The small tentacles sprouting from the end of each thick arm allowed for them to manipulate their surroundings with a great deal of dexterity, despite their odd appearance. The Nick Cyan female tapped at the screen for another moment before announcing, "The system has 4 major planets and at least 5 minor ones that I can detect. The gas giants seem to have many smaller orbital bodies as well. We cannot rule them out as of yet. The signals I detected pervade this system. It will be difficult to pinpoint them from this distance." They paused, dark yellow eye stalks waving as they raised a thick, fleshy arm. The tall, shiny exoskeleton Porum kicked a single front leg and fluttered their large iridescent wing eyes.
No, we are going to follow the regulations set about by the Amalgamated Intergalactic Harmonies guidelines regarding the potential first contact of pre-galactic species. That decision is final.
They punctuated the remark with a stomped hoof-like foot. Alitok shook their head, the thick, shaggy fur of it fluttering in the freezing air. "I am inclined to agree with the captain this time, Cascus. Remember what happened to the crew of the last ship that broke protocol?" The 3 shared a small moment of silence for the lives that had been lost. After another moment, Gier stepped towards the edge of the raised platform and looked around.
Yes, a dark time indeed. I am pleased that we have managed to go for these last 7 decades without a similar incident.
Now Cascus spoke, their voice a little muffled as they lamented. "Yes, 70 long years with nothing to show for it but uninhabited world after uninhabited world. I am trying so hard not to get my hopes up for this one. After all, it could be nothing again." The Nick Cyan female was right, though. The journey had been long and unfruitful. Ye-air shifted again, the grinding of their quartz joints an all-pervading shrill creak that would have set most others' nerves on edge. They tilted their wing eyes as they looked around the room.
This is the one. Look, there are many planets that could be the source of the signals. Why don't you just start from the most likely and move inwards from there?
It was a solid plan. Alitok gestured towards the nearest screen with a heavily furred arm. "Might as well start out at that small dual planetary system. It looks a little small to be life-bearing, but we have heard of stranger. Besides, it is in the perfect zone of habitability." Ye-air snorted loudly, their wing eyes shifting position to better absorb the glow of the consoles.
Yes, in a manner of speaking. The gravity is far too low to support an atmosphere, so you are looking at less than a millionth percentile chance of anything there. No, it looks nice and would probably make a great luxury resort location, but I would put my credits on it being one of the gas giant moons. Maybe one of those 2 big ones around the 5th planet.
They would have pointed to the screen if they had arms or manipulator digits to speak of. Instead, they just moved their wing eyes in the direction of the larger screen. Cascus pulled themselves a little closer to the dimly glowing console on the raised platform and inspected it for a minute. After a second to alter the ship's powerful observation systems, they soon had blown-up images of the two moons in question. Maybe. This one here, it has large, straight striations on its surface, but no signs of craters or activity. That suggests that its surface undergoes pretty significant renewal periodically. It doesn't look terribly tectonically active, so I would surmise that its entire surface is simply a shell floating on a much deeper ocean of molten water. What is keeping the core molten is a mystery and pure speculation, but I believe that the surface is far too volatile to support any manner of meaningful life. The short and wide alien then moved the view to that of the other moon around the huge, banded gas giant. Pointing at it with a series of their manipulator tendrils, they listed off a similar series of reasons against the moon. Now this one is different, solid surface, limited atmosphere, and protected by the gas giant's magnetosphere to boot. There remains only the major issue of its composition and apparent age. And don't even get me started about the other large moons around that body. 2 are cratered hellscapes. The next is actively dousing itself in molten carbon as we speak, and the others are so small we could use them as paperweights. They finished with an exasperated gurgle. The twin lines of multicolored cilia that ran between their eyes waved furiously in their consternation. Alitalk paced between the two, the Hobulite's movements slow and jerky due to their short, stubby legs. What about the other giants? Surely there has to be something there. A moon is by far the most likely location. Deep, dark. Most of the ship's crew came from captured worlds. There was a grating noise as the captain moved closer to the screens again, as if that would make what they sought magically appear. The Porum kicked out both front legs and asked,
"What about that hydrocarbon planet around the ring giant? It has some desirable traits."
Cascus bobbed their eye stalks, arms moving constantly as they fought to remain aloof. The captain was right, and the Nixian hated to admit it as it was her job to look at things objectively. The gas-shrouded hydrocarbon moon was the next likely origin for the strange signals they had detected. As for the signals, they had at first been little more than garbled static. The powerful interstellar energies had ripped all meaning from them long before they had reached the next closest system. But they had been far too regular to have been purely natural, and so they had decided to investigate. It was rare to find a technological species in that brief window between the discovery of powerful radio emitters and faster-than-light travel, the two being inextricably linked as they were. The ship shuddered slightly as a small but powerful probe was launched towards the distant world. It seemed to twist in upon itself and then blinked out of existence, only to reappear an instant later already in the orbit of that distant yellow moon. The quantum link it held with the ship allowed for instantaneous communication with no lag. It took the probe only minutes to enter orbit and send another smaller drone down towards the surface. The drone was equipped with light-bending technology to make it appear as any native flora or fauna they willed. All the better to help it blend into the surroundings, and the surroundings as they were seemed bleak, to say the least. The drone broke through the thick clouds to barren waste of crystallized water ice and lakes of liquid methane that flowed like rivers into larger seas. All about were signs of wear and the craters of impacts, but no life, not standing crystalline trees. No amorphous bacterial colonies, and not so much as a floating aeroplankton to stir in the planet's empty expanse. The tall, white-furred form of Alitalk shuffled and then pointed to the readouts. It isn't here, either. It must be coming from further in system, see? The probe is detecting the signals as being stronger towards the inner planets. This caused a pause. Yeer looked at the tall Hobulite in what passed as a nervous manner for their kind.
"The inner system? Surely not.
With a sun of that brightness, surely all the inner worlds are far too hot for life to be possible. Perhaps the signal is simply being refracted by some unknown phenomenon.
The others looked at the data. While the fourth planet seemed a little on the balmy side, its very thin atmosphere actually helped it stay cool enough to not be immediately deadly, though the radiation levels one would experience on the surface would be worrisome, though. One would likely sicken and die from anything more than limited exposure to the deadly radiation emitted by the hot young star. It was clear just from looking at the barren red world that it was dead, though. No magnetosphere to speak of, thin atmosphere and huge planet-wide storms of epic proportions. Any life that tried to cling to life there would certainly be hardy indeed, enough to be of great astonishment to the scientific community of the amalgamated intergalactic harmony. Ye clicked their diamond-hard teeth as they looked at the data, their wing eyes fully extended as they tried to absorb as much information as possible.
We could report the fourth world as a resort world. Surely there would be some value to setting down a pleasure colony there. I can think of a few species that might be interested in such an idea. Quick jaunts to the surface, followed by long, uninterrupted walks through tunnels bored in the dry ice of the poles, perhaps.
His expressed idea was met with a waving of hands and tendrils as the other two expressed the problems with such an idea. Cascus waved a thick arm and gurgled. Maybe, but there is still the problem of the missing signals. We should redirect the probe to the inner system to better determine its source. You know, as well as I, of the procedure pertaining to inhabited systems. Subjugation before exploitation. As it had been with all of them. They were all serfs to the Great Harmony. It was a good idea, and Ye acknowledged the fact with a small bow towards the squat alien.
Yes, do that. Put the probe between the third and fourth planets.
They turned back towards the edge of the plinth, their wing eyes looking out over the cavernous bridge space that surrounded them. The HS Tower of Fraxis was a colossal ship, one of the largest Mega Motivator class exploration and survey extractinator vessels built by the UMOP Corporation. At well over 12,000 meters in length, it held a tremendous crew complement of 2,300 souls, all of them adapted to the freezing temperatures of the Titanic vessel's interior, and crammed far closer than many of them were ultimately comfortable with. But they were given little choice to refuse on their century-long service contract. It was in the largest chamber on the ship that Ye and the others resided at that moment. The three of them were situated on the raised command and control plinth near the center of the room. It took the probe only moments to reorient itself towards the inner system and another minute to flash into existence using its sophisticated FTL drives. Almost as soon as it did, the control panel started flashing a warning. At least half a dozen cool blinking lights of as many colors. Cascus moved closer slowly, three of their arms anchoring them to their raised platform as they dangled the other two into empty space in an attempt to get a better look at the readouts. What is that? They gurgled curiously, more interested than worried by the flashing panel. The captain bounded over, their hard exoskeleton clattering as it made contact with the decking.
It is a warning signal.
What does it mean that it has been pinged by multiple types of deep space radar? From where? The consternation was clear in their voice as they swayed from side to side, unable to interact with the screens due to their lack of manipulative digits.
Go to maximum stealth mode.
It was Alley Talk that answered the mystery. Well, it looks like we have found where the signals were originating from. Would you look at that? Their long, shaggy-haired arm was pointed at the largest of the screens, the dull blue glow seeming strangely brighter as they all peered close. The screen showed a planet, the likes of which they had never seen in all their long years of exploration. The surface was largely flat and mostly a deep blue that looked strangely artificial in comparison to the normal whites and browns of most worlds. The wisps of clouds covered the view of the large broken land masses that seemed to almost float on that endless sea of ominous dark liquid. There wasn't a noise for a moment, and then all at once they spoke. Their voices covered each other as they exclaimed in surprise and a little fear.
The signal is coming from there? Surely not.
What is all over the surface? Surely it couldn't be. By the 9 halls of the fallen, the world is covered in molten water. They fell silent once more as the probe confirmed their worst suspicions. Cascus noted with some emotional difficulty, the signals are coming from the third world, all right, and they are strong. Far too strong to be from a non-advanced species. In fact, I am also detecting limited signals coming from the planet's large moon. That gave them pause. The planet is inhabited, much less to speak of its existence in the first place. Alatok grumbled loudly. Gier fluttered their wing eyes and took in the vista once more.
Tell me, Cascus, what are the odds of finding a molten water world with an atmosphere thick enough to prevent it from forming a solid ice crust?
Cascus tapped at their console and muttered to themselves under their breath. The sound was so muffled that Gier could not make it out. Instead of trying to hear what the science officer was cooking up, they turned to the tall, hairy form of Alatok.
Alatok, in your millennia of surface to the harmony, have you ever seen anything like this?
The thin hobulite shook their long head, their fur flinging from side to side from the motion. In all my long years, I have never personally laid eyes on a molten water world, but I have heard of them. They are rare because they do not last long. Maybe a few 100 million years at the most, given the absolute best conditions. The system is at least a few billion years old, though, and this world has a feel of age to it. Yer had to agree. The planet did look old in some ways, but it looked strangely youthful, too. No large craters marred its surface, though the moon that swung around it bore many such scars. It was uncanny. The surface looked all manners of scarred, but nothing really stood out to Yer or Alatok immediately as to the cause. When he pointed it out to Cascus, the flat 5-armed Nixian female waved their eye stalks and blinked slowly. The world is heavily afflicted by erosion. The molten water evaporates and forms a gaseous state in which it condenses and then rains back upon the surface of the world in a never-ending cycle that can break mountains given enough time. They shuddered, a low groaning sound emanating from them as they expressed their discomfort. Alatok seemed to shake their head without moving, their tiny eyes peering at the surface of the world with what may have been mild horror. Molten water falls from the sky? Is that what all those clouds are made from? They seemed a little more than mortified, and Gier seemed to agree as they raised their wing eyes and stepped back from the screen, as if it had suddenly become a deadly predator. Stomping 3 of their feet in unison, the ship's captain gnashed diamond-hard teeth and remarked,
We must send a drone down to the world. We need to know what manner of horrors lurk on its blighted surface.
Cascus didn't disagree. Well, the probe is already in high orbit near the planet's Lagrange point, and you would not believe the amount of junk they have orbiting around out there. There are more than 100 million objects on the trackers reading large enough to cause damage to the probe should they impact. Most seem to be bits of debris and miscellaneous junk, but there are also a significant amount of thinking machines around this world, and they all seem to be made of artificial materials. They finished their report with a gurgling fluff of released air. Alatok clapped his skeletal hands together and spoke, their grumbling voice emanating slowly from their tall form. Then we must simply be careful when the drone is sent to inspect the surface. They are able to survive atmospheric entry, so they should have no trouble with the surface temperature of the world. It was true. It took them only moments to send the commands to the device, and a moment later there was a new blip on their scanners. This one moved much faster than even the orbiting satellites as it arrowed towards the middle of the largest continent on the world. All 3 of them were fixated on the screen as the feed started up. The blue ball grew in definition and size till it seemed to cover the entire screen. The blue gave way to greens and browns as the drone positioned itself over the largest landmass. The drone fell down and down as flames licked its strengthened chitin hull and the feed was filled with smoke and static. Finally, it broke through that cloud layer and slowed as its gravity chutes deployed, wings of pure force grabbing the planet's narrowing gravity well and slowing its descent like a person using their arms to slow their progress down a playground slide. The feed fizzed a bit, then stabilized as the drone hovered in the air at least 2 kilometers above the surface. It was cloaked, but it didn't hurt to be extra careful, and Cascus activated the drone's passive mode. They had no idea what kind of technological capabilities the inhabitants of the planet had, but clearly they could produce radio signals and launch objects into orbit. So they were certainly advanced enough to detect the signature pings of an uncloaked probe or drone. That would be less than ideal, and so they kept the drone on passive observational mode as it hovered on its gravity chute and took various readings of temperature, atmospheric composition, and ambient light. The planet's star was much brighter than most that life formed around. Most life seemed to form slowly around red dwarfs. Their incredible lifespans and generally high surface activity made them good potential locations for planets to form in orbit far out into their cold outer reaches. Yer knew this. He knew that a planet that orbited too close to their home star became tidally locked and were often scorched by the ferocious heat of their stars. That was why all life discovered by the great amalgamated intergalactic harmony were cryogenic worlds covered in frozen compounds. They had found a few rare cases of warmer species in the orbit of massive planets, whose powerful magnetic fields acted as shields against the worst of the stellar radiation from their home stars. But even these were far below the temperatures needed for water to be in its molten state. He shrugged his wings. Yer knew these things, and yet, before their very wing eyes, they were seeing not just speculative evidence, but hard proof that there was another way for life to form and even thrive. The 3 crew of the distant vessel watched the screen via the quantum link, the drone capturing the most horrifyingly compelling evidence they had ever seen of such a contradiction to the rules of life as they understood it. The creatures of the planet seemed to thrive under the incredible conditions of their large blue world despite this, as if spiteful of the way things were meant to be. It was Cascus that first broke the silence. Ever the scientists, they seemed to have the most objective outlook of the 3. Well, this is certainly an eye-opening experience. Look at how diverse this world is. And from what the scanners on the probe are saying, this is one of the least ecologically diverse locations on this world's surface. Why, there must be hundreds of thousands of different species in this world. They trailed off, their muffled barks growing faint as they spoke again. Perhaps millions. Alitalk shook their whole body weight at the sight. They were the oldest and wisest of them at nearly 1,100 galactic years of age. I cannot believe this. I have heard of such things in the ancient legends of our ancestors, worlds of sparkling beauty that orbit near to the hellish interior of their systems, but never have I heard of one so completely inundated in this manner. The life on this planet could not have evolved in such conditions, surely. In its molten state, water is far too reactive to be safe for biological systems. Life would have to progress at a pace that would see it destroyed in mere decades. The drone beeped as its sensors seemed to detect a burst of signals directed in its direction from nearby. Yer reared back on his 2 legs as they gnashed their teeth, their quartz exoskeleton rattling as they demanded to know what that had been. Cascus manipulated one of the nearby screens with the tendrils on the ends of their fingers. It was not directed at the drone. Instead, it seemed to be a burst of encrypted data directed at one of those large metallic towers in the distance. the ones that seem to be broadcasting radio waves off of the atmosphere itself. They squirmed slightly, their wide, flat body moving to the left and right as they tried to decode the message. Alatok nodded towards the air. Surely they cannot reflect off a neutral atmosphere. That must mean it's electrically charged. They looked at each other. Such a thing was not unheard of, for moons with particularly dense atmospheres in the orbit of large gas giants, at least. But on inhabited worlds, it was rare to see such a strongly charged layer.
Well, what is the composition of this ionized layer?
Yer asked. Cascus made a gesture towards the probe's data. The probe passed through this layer to reach its current location. It seems to be mostly made of... No, that can't be right. The other two crowded in as Cascus remarked in a surprised gurgle. Their atmosphere contains incredibly high concentrations of free oxygen. Nearly 21% of the total mass is toxic beyond reckoning. This caused another minor uproar. But how in the face of the Great Mother could they survive in such conditions? How do they even live with such a caustic compound? And at those temperatures, it is known to eat metal and even non-metals like it were acid.
The sensors must be wrong. Calibrate them again.
Cascus gestured towards the screen. I have already done so. 3 times, in fact. It doesn't lie. Their world is covered in molten water with an oxidizing atmosphere. Incredible. Truly, the universe is infinite and full of horrors. They muttered, quoting from popular harmony literature. Alatok noted as Yer checked the probe again. Can we get any closer? I want to see them. What they look like. Cascus bobbed an eye stalk and the visual began to descend. The drone becomes much easier to spot as it gets closer. Even the stealth field will not hide the telltale shimmer of the grav chute. I may be able to descend within direct visual distance without too much trouble, however. The console nearest to them pinged quietly as they strived to position the device, and so Alatok took it upon themselves to check the data. The data streamed has been analyzed. It seems to be a continuous carrier wave. The computer has decoded the hidden message as some form of picture stream. Shall I project it onto the secondary screen? Yer hesitated.
We have no way of knowing what the stream contains. It could be nothing, or it could be some manner of mentally scarring material.
Cascus bobbed an eye stalk. Yes, but that is a risk that must be taken in the name of science and reason. I will observe this data stream. You should try and gather more data on these creatures themselves. Alatok seemed to hesitate, and the pale form of Yer moved closer to them.
What is it, wise Alatok?
He spoke with reverence, not wanting to cause the ancient any more distress than they had been subjected to already. Alatok gestured towards the data the probe had gathered through the drone. Look at these readings. Temperatures hot enough to melt water, turn carbon dioxide to gas, and even soften metal. It is terrifying that anything could survive under these hellish conditions, much less thrive as these seem to. The amount of biodiversity on this world far surpasses all but the oldest of AIH worlds. They moved closer to the data as the drone finally seemed to home in on a cluster of primitive-looking dwellings.
Look at the way they live, Alatok. In large structures on the ground, exposed fully to the elements without a care in the world.
The creatures themselves were strange. Their upright, bipedal bodies seemed soft and malleable, not like the hard exoskeletal exteriors of most of the Harmony species. They moved with a speed and grace to make an Armalian green with envy, and seemed immune to the caustic effects of the world's broiling atmosphere. Cascus spoke up then, their voice a little muffled in the freezing air. I have determined the objective of the intercepted data stream. It seems to be a communication network. It was a visual stream of data that was being shared between two of these creatures. They seem highly social, despite the terrible nature of the world. Yer nodded.
Let us see how these beings communicate.
They may have expected any number of strange and horrifying things, but they were presently surprised by their newest discovery.
They speak with a mouth, vibrations in the air producing sounds that are picked up audibly.
They said, at least a little surprised by the normalcy of the discovery. Cascus seemed to chuckle, the burbling noise only a little muffled. Yes, what were you expecting? They are still living things. They must abide by similar laws to us, though the conditions vary wildly. They seem to eat, sleep, and breathe in a manner similar to us, though, according to the probe, their bodies are not only hot enough to melt water, but produce their own heat from the food they consume. They emit heat enough to melt water, ice, and flash carbon dioxide to gas? Alatok asked incredulously. Cascus answered quickly. Yes, and from these preliminary bioscans they seem to breathe the oxygen directly, too. They seem to use it to aid in high-temperature biochemical reactions using the liquid water itself as a solvent. It is the violence of these reactions that make them burn like tiny suns themselves. Now it was Yer's turn to chatter their crushing teeth in alarm.
They have liquid water inside them?
They are mostly made of water, in fact. It would make sense as it is the dominant stuff of their planet. Over 70% of that planet is covered in molten water oceans. In all likelihood, life on their world evolved immersed in the stuff, the scientist gurgled. The captain would have turned paler if they could.
Evolved in liquid water? What a thought.
Alatok spoke next. The probe is reading hundreds of data streams emanating from the planet. Thousands. Tens of thousands, in fact. Mighty yeek, there must be hundreds of millions of them on that planet. Billions, in fact, Cascus said bluntly. The others looked at them in shock and more than a little disbelief. Alatok's beady eye staring at the others from under their thick, shaggy fur. Cascus continued, their manipulator tendrils waving as they gestured to the screen. Look at the readings. They seem to be a highly social species, sometimes congregating into large dwelling congregations of millions of individuals. They gather in groups so dense that they have built truly impressive structures just in an attempt to contain their numbers. Some pictures appeared on the screen. They looked like the cities that they may have been familiar with, except for the incredible density of the structures. They were packed so densely together that they nearly formed a wall of steel and concrete. Some of the structures were so tall that they seemed to scrape the underside of the planet's endless blue sky itself. The captain breathed out, a puff of mix exuding from them as they spoke with awe.
Their population is greater than 100 Harmony Worlds. 1,000.
Alatok gave the captain a worried glance. The hoplite moved back a little, clearly distressed by the newness of the sight. We must report this to the Amalgamated Intergalactic Harmony immediately. Yer stomped a foot in equal distress, their quartz exoskeleton chattering as they moved.
And tell them what? That we have discovered a world made of death? Tell me, how would we even initiate first contact? Via radio communication? Don't be ridiculous.
Cascus seemed to agree. Yes, it is regulation that first contact must always be initiated in person to establish friendship and presence. Were we to travel to the coldest part of their world, then we would still perish from the heat. Alatok shivered. Not from the cold, it was quite comfortable on the freezing bridge. Instead, they shivered from near shock, their ancient mind trying to parse the new data while still keeping hold of all that they knew to be true. In all the years of the AIH's exploration of the wider galaxy, they had never before encountered beings so utterly inimical to their own way of life. They uttered quietly, "Maybe we don't report this world." The bridge was silent. The three powerful beings looking at one another as the near impossible idea was uttered. Cascus whispered, their eye stalks jittering as they spoke. What? Just leave? Forget we ever saw anything? Mark the area as explored and never look back? Alatok nodded. Yier's wing eyes fluttered as they turned their iridescent surfaces to look at each of the others in turn.
What are you two on about? There's no way we could get away with that.
The three aliens looked at the screens again. The screens that coolly showed a vision of hell from their darkest nightmares. Scorching, dry deserts. Expanses of roiling water hot enough to melt the solidified dry ice from their skeletons, and skies stained blue with corrosive oxygen. No, this world was a cursed place. Death in every form and function. Yier shivered too, their exoskeleton chiming like breaking crystal as they finally nodded their blunt head.
Okay, I agree.
Cascus reached out and one by one switched off the monitors till only theirs remained. They worked quickly, expunging the record of the world from the ship's records as the drone and probe reunited and were ordered to accelerate into the system's star, to be destroyed utterly. Far out into the system's Oort cloud, a huge gray ship began to move slowly away from the bright yellow sun that dominated the inner system. The dusty gray surface of the vessel began to shiver as its main reactors built up an energy surplus. The excess of energy released with a pulse of pure violent force that seemed to tear a hole in the very fabric of reality. The ship was consumed by this roiling darkness, the sphere expanding for a time before collapsing under the weight of existence, leaving absolutely nothing behind. In the inner system, a terrestrial world turned slowly in its endless march around its parent star. The shining blue surface inhabited by billions of creatures that scurried to and fro about their business, unaware of just how close they had come to enslavement and ruin. But it would not deter them in their progress, even had they known this terrible fact. For each day was a struggle and each life was an eternity. They would continue to grow and learn until one day, in the far future, the stars would become theirs forevermore.